The chair calls to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board on November 9th, 2021. The time is 6:01 p.m. The board will have Vice President Sanowski, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will have a roll call starting from the right.
Zach Lindsay.
Libby Hart-Wells.
Patty Beckman. Julie Sanowski.
Jan Michael Greenberg. All 5 board members are present, and there is a quorum. The board will now move to agenda item 2D, approval of agenda, board action required. Are there any amendments to the agenda as presented? With no amendments, the chair moves to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor say, oh, apologies, is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sanowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 2D, approval of agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, the motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to action item 3A, information discussion item SAA, SEA, and SSPA updates.
Well, good evening, President Greenberg and Vice President Sanowski and members of the Governing Board. As our association representatives make their way forward, I'd like to take just a moment to thank all of our Scottsdale Unified School District employees for what they do every day in support of our students, teachers, staff, school, and school communities. This week is National School Psychology Week, and next week is American Education Week. Wednesday, November 17th is Education Support Professionals Day, and Friday, the 19th, is Substitute Educators Day. Based on all of the many and varied ways Scottsdale Unified's 3,600 full and part-time employees support the district, the way I see it, every week could be American Education Week. When you think about what our employees do, they keep our school buses rolling 2,300 miles every day, challenge and inspire our students to dream big, manage the district's face to the public in school front offices, distribute nutritious breakfasts and lunches, lead their school's educators team, keep our schools and athletic grounds in shipshape, and so much more. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you who are representing our SUSD employees this evening on behalf of the Governing Board and the administration as we celebrate these various days that are coming forward, and look forward to your reports this evening.
Thank you. I don't know if I drew the short straw or the long straw. You want to move this down? Okay, you can hear me? Okay. Good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Menzel, Ms. Wagner, and guests. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening to represent our respective employee associations, the SAA, SEA, and the SSPA. Your interest in the progress of our work communicates your commitment and acknowledgement that to include all employees in policy development creates a shared vision and common goal to develop and continue the best education for our SUSD students. Our association representatives and district leaders have participated in interest-based negotiations training facilitated by Dr. Eddie Jenna, Associate Vice Chancellor for Faculty Affairs, and Tamara Moore, Senior Mediator and Maricopa Community Colleges. IBN will put into action the intent of Policy HA to create and sustain a progressive professional climate and operational procedures that call for and use the full creative capacities of all employees in the attainment of educational goals. IBN is an interest-based approach to developing a mutually respectful, collaborative meet and confer process. It is our hope that through meet and confer, our employees will realize improved working conditions with fair competitive salaries and benefits and be provided with leadership opportunities at sites and the district. All employees will be confident of your commitment with the reinstatement and continued development of our employee agreements.
This is just a continuation of the same report. We decided to come up unified and do one report for you tonight. So in Mark Tucker's book, Leading High Performance School Systems, 9 building blocks of excelling education systems are identified. These blocks have guided the district's strategic planning process and will guide us through the collaborative meet and confer process. They are aligned with our district's new vision, We engage all students in world-class, future-focused learning. Our mission, we inspire, motivate, empower all to think critically, act collaboratively, and embrace diversity for a life of intellectual exploration, community engagement, and personal growth. And our values, which are encompassed by working collaboratively with our constituents and district leadership to restore trust through inclusion and unity. As we embark on this collaborative meet and confer process, we strive to remain aligned to these building blocks and to the district's strategic planning process, because we believe that our students and the staff supporting our students deserve a high-performing system.
And I get to end with, we look forward to working with our respective employee associations, district leadership, and Dr. Jenna and Tamara to build a meet and confer system that will outlast its members, because it will set the standard and be the example of working in a world-class, future-focused educational system. When we invest in the staff at all levels, they feel supported, valued, and willing to do the work that results in better learning environments for all of our students. And we do this better together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any board member questions or comments for our SAA, SEA, and SSPA leadership? Vice President Sanowski.
Thrilled to hear your reports tonight and that you worked collaboratively on presenting this. That's, I know, something that our teachers work really hard to teach our students and encourage our students to function that way in the classrooms. So it's great to hear that the employees are also continuing with that, developing trust through inclusion and unity. Love that. Is it possible for you to share some of your priorities identified in the meet and confer process? You can say no if not. I don't know where you are in that process.
Our interests would be to have our employment agreements, and then and salaries and benefits.
Good to know. Thank you.
And for SEA, we have launched a certified bargaining survey so that we can collect input to develop those interests to bring to the meet and confer from our bargaining unit group.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments for our leadership?
I have one more.
Vice President Sanowski.
Ms. Blaker, could you respond kind of in the same way that Ms. Williams did? As far as like what would be identified as your interests within the support? I know you have very many work families and categories within your organization itself. I know it's probably hard to even develop common thread beyond compensation. So what would be, beyond compensation, what would be some of your interests?
Thank you. We agree that at the forefront, we are looking to reinstate our agreement, moving it from a handbook to an agreement. And we are a unique group of employees, and we hope to continue to work with our job families to bring forward their interests and their suggestions for the better working conditions, but also find the commonality across the board so that we can find something that we can hone in on. But yes, salaries is the one thing that we have to target.
Yes, understood. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Are there any other questions or comments related to the SAA, SEA, and SSPA updates? Well, I would just like to thank all of you. It's nice when we do these presentations as a group, and I think that it shows, one, solidarity, but it shows that we're all working together to accomplish this. I know the process takes time and it's slow, and I appreciate looking at Mark Tucker. I know that I asked a lot of questions about him last time because I do want to see if we all share that common philosophy. But thank you so much. We simply could not educate our students to the high quality that we do without each of your groups working with us. So thank you.
Well, interest-based negotiation is about listening, so we took that task in.
Well, thank you very much. You guys have a wonderful night.
Thank
The board will now move to action item 3B, first read high school and middle school planning guide for the 2022-2023 school year. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg and members of the governing board. I would like to invite up Dr. Guerin, Dr. Karen Dodds, and Melinda Splittick, I think, to come in and review where we are with respect to this process.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dodds to begin.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I will raise the mic, and I will hopefully present. Perfect. Good evening, Board President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, members of our board, Dr. Menzel and Gladys. I feel really grateful for this opportunity tonight to come before you for the first read of our middle school and high school planning guides for updates for the 2022-2023 school year. As you know, this is an annual process that we follow here in Scottsdale Unified School District. As a new member of our leadership team here in Scottsdale, I feel fortunate to have been able to join a committee that is well established in ensuring that our courses that we offer for our students are representative not only of graduation requirements for our students, but are high interest and are courses that are going to prepare our students for future focused learning that will ensure their pathway for college or career that they choose. Represented here are the list of instructional coaches. You will find counselors, assistant principals of educational services, district coordinators, directors, as well as members of our SIMAR department who, as you know, are all very knowledgeable. Additionally, I want to acknowledge the attention to detail displayed by Kayla Price. She is the administrative assistant to Mrs. Melinda Splittig, the AP of Ed Services over at Coronado, and she has produced the guides that were presented to you. Tonight, I'm pleased to share this presentation with Melinda Splittig, as well as Trex Jones, who is a senior at Arcadia High School, and he is the president of our Student Advisory Board. And specific to Melinda, being able to utilize her expertise, having served on our planning guide committee, has been invaluable to me as I've learned our process here. And so we are excited to be able to share the revisions as well as Trex's contributions regarding class rank and the perspective that he and his classmates bring for that discussion tonight too. So I'll invite Melinda to come before you to share a little bit more about the highlights for our middle school and high school guides.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here tonight. So just very briefly to capture the work that has been done over the last couple of years, we didn't have a lot of changes that really needed to be made this year. So this is a process that happens annually within SUSD, and this year we were really able to just build upon the work that's been done previously. So in terms of middle school highlights this year, we added to our K-8 school of choice offerings, Scottsdale Online Learning. And in that description, we made sure that we included the benefits of SOL and all that SOL can offer our families who are looking for that virtual K-8 option. Additionally, we made the change to switch social studies to history and social sciences in order to align with the wording of state standards. So it's really important as we go through the review and revision of the guides that we align what we have in our own guides here in SUSD with the state standards to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're providing that excellent educational opportunities for all of our students. Additionally, Karen Brown and her team for Gifted provided updates to the language for how students can participate in gifted services here within SUSD at all levels. So that information was revised and changed for the middle school planning guide this year. In terms of high school, this is where we get a little bit more complex and complicated. Zeroing in first and foremost on social studies, we also here moved to change the title from social studies to history and social sciences, again to align with the wording of the state standards, which again, that's really important for our own internal book. In terms of new courses, this year we brought forth 4 new courses. The first course that I'm going to talk about is My Digital Brand, which is a new CTE course. This is the new second-year course for Digital Future. So Digital Future started a couple years ago, and this class was really built not only with the state standards in mind, but working with students and capturing their interest in all things digital content creation, which is super popular right now with students. This definitely aligns with our value of making sure that we provide excellent, high student interest courses for our students every single day. So in this class, students will create content. They will master skills tied to web design, data analytics, personal branding, and advertisement editing. More importantly, they walk away from this second-year CTE course with a digital professional portfolio that they can use as they head into the workforce to open their own online store or as they move into their next step for post-secondary success. So we are really excited that we are going to be offering this course, with your guys' approval, of course, for the 22-23 school year. Additionally, we added another English language arts elective titled The History and Influence of British Music, and this actually came out of high student interest during the pandemic. So this is a course that's really going to look at the historic and influential British rock artists that kind of shaped society. Students are going to engage in research, they'll read informational texts, they'll discuss the themes of the genres, they'll compose argumentative research and narrative pieces going through the writing process. So this is going to be more of an upper level 11th and 12th grade English language arts elective. Next up, we have a new lab science with a dual enrollment option titled Sports, Exercise, and Health Science. And this class gives us a really unique opportunity to blend sports, exercise, and health science, obviously, but more importantly, to take a look at anatomy and physiology, biomechanics, psychology, and nutrition, and to really dive into the science behind peak athletic performance and what it takes to compete at those high levels. Again, this is another lab science. This would be a third-year science class in our scope. It also has that dual enrollment option, which anytime we can offer dual enrollment classes is an excellent win for SUSD. We're really thankful for our partnership with SCC. And lastly, we are bringing back Mariachi Ensemble, which this is such a cool class that we haven't had in a couple of years. So I'm excited to see that it was brought back to the planning guide this year. So Mariachi Ensemble is going to focus on those fundamental skills of performing mariachi music. Different than other musical instrument classes is that vocal component. This also is a class that really you can walk into with not a lot of experience and participate in a music class, again, with no experience. So those are the 5 classes that we bring before you. Part of the planning guide process this year was also to revisit the conversation of class rank and transitioning from a class ranking system to using the Latin system of honors for academic recognition here within SUSD. So a little context for you guys. This conversation started in 2019 and it came from the high school planning guide process. So through the high school planning guide process, we realized that there was this challenge associated with using academic GPA to rank our students. And some of those unintentional consequences is that students are not exploring classes outside of designated academic areas because they don't want that negative impact to their GPA and to their class rank. And then really limiting that academic achievement to only classes that we are identifying internally as being academic. So to provide a little bit of a bigger picture before we move into the rationale and the research, I wanted to have Trux Jones from Arcadia and Student Advisory Board talk about what he and his peers shared with us as part of this process, both in 2019 and currently in 2021.
From the consensus from our group in 2019 and to 2021 was we didn't want a system where for a student to move up, another one has to move down and be hurt by class ranking. But also another discussion was people not choosing electives of their choice or pursuing different electives and seeing different passions that they want to do because they're bound to they have to keep their class rank higher, they have to stay in these ranks. So that was the main part of the discussion, not choosing different classes because of class rank. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chucks. So additionally, when we started looking into what would be the consequences of eliminating class rank, we really wanted to make sure that we did our research. So we worked with and discussed with over 80 colleges. What would eliminating class rank do for our students? Would it not allow them to compete and achieve at a high level once they got to college, or to not be accepted at the same rate as their peers? And 100% of those colleges confirmed that eliminating class rank will not negatively impact students, which that's music to our ears. That's exactly what we want to hear. Additionally, when we look at in-state merit-based scholarships, ASU, U of A, NAU, they're all using the Arizona Board of Regents GPA model. So they take our transcript and they pull out the 16 academic classes that make up the A-Board GPA. They also award those merit scholarships based on SAT or ACT scores. When we expanded that pool and we looked at out-of-state universities, they take a much more holistic approach than our in-state universities. So they look at the entirety of the student's high school career. They look at the rigor of the classes that they attempted to take. They also look at test scores, grades, letters of recommendation, personal essays, community service, extracurriculars, and a whole host of other things before granting admission. Also, colleges reported that ranking students can actually negatively impact students when they go to apply, because if they're competing with a student that doesn't rank, they could actually not be accepted because that other student might outshine the one who was ranked. And most importantly and most shockingly to us as part of the research was that several colleges reported that only about 20% of high schools nationwide continue to rank their students. So this really allowed us, before the pandemic, pre-COVID, to make this move to looking at something else in order to award academic recognition. So just a little bit of background for you guys, a little bit of research. So we take what happened in that fall of 2019, and we worked with counselors, we worked with site leaders, we worked with site councils and parent councils within all of our learning communities. We worked heavily and closely with Student Advisory Board to come up with this recommendation of using the Latin system of honors to award that recognition to our students. So I'm going to have Dr. Dodds join us to talk about our distinction categories and where we are in the process right now.
So this infographic that you see here captures the information that Mrs. Flittick just shared with you. It also includes key information regarding the timeline for this proposed transition, going from class rank to the Latin honor system of academic recognition. And the language of summa cum laude, magna cum laude, and cum laude will be clearly articulated here in this infographic, and it will be the basis of a thought exchange that we will relaunch, because we do realize that this conversation started during the pandemic, and while there was a lot of excitement for it, there's also been a lot that has happened in our schools. So we want to bring this top of mind again to our community, back to our schools, back to our students, and ensure that everybody is aware of this, because it does have implications when we're thinking about selecting our courses. So we want you to be aware of that. We also want you to know that with this information, we will be sure to communicate it in every way possible, even outside of the means of thought exchange, we want to utilize Dr. Menzel's memo to make sure people know of it. We will use our internal sources of communication, our admin inbox, our teacher talk, our classified connection. We will work with our school senators to make sure they can get onto their school news networks and make sure that children are aware of their ability to participate in this, because it's really important for us to have all stakeholders aware of and contributing to a thought exchange, again, about this topic. And so just to highlight once again, how this timeline is proposed is that we will use the class of 23 and the class of 24 as bridge years and officially move to this system for the Latin Honors Recognition System for overall weighted GPA with the class of 2025, so that all people can be informed when selecting their classes and ensure that they are really choosing a pathway that honors who they are as people, as well as their aspirations for college and career. With that, what questions might you have for us?
Thank you very much. Do we have any board member questions or comments? Board Member Hart-Wells.
At the outset, I wish to thank all of you, all the staff, in particular, for your earnest review of the planning guide. I realize it's done once a year, but I do feel like there are some alignment and recalibrations with the current culture and times that we live in, and you've made a, like I said, I think an earnest review and amendment, a set of amendments to the planning guide. I also want to give my grateful thanks to the parents and particularly to the students who lent their collective voices to inform the process of leading to the guide that's in front of us today that we're considering, in particular the class rank. I love that. And thank you. It's taken 2 years for you to get to this point, and that's not uncommon, right, when you do something well-researched. So thank you for the endurance and the stamina, particularly in the times we've lived through the last 2 years, to propose something that is most certainly, I think, more beneficial to our students. The new course offerings that are proposed, I was able to map those to the Arizona Department of Education's their courses that are ranked that inform industry needs that are indexed to CTE courses. And I applaud the entrepreneurial focus in some of these classes. I think that was outstanding. So with that, I do have some specific questions. If we could unsurprisingly turn to the science course section of the planning guide. And that would start on 103. So we have additions, not just in science, but in other areas and other core subjects of pre-AP courses. I have some wish to propose some amendments to languages for the pre-AP, the biology honors, the chemistry, and the chemistry pre-AP chemistry honors, one of which, for chemistry, the lack of a prerequisite for both the chemistry honors pre-AP and the pre-AP chemistry, where chemistry 1 does have a prerequisite of algebra 1, which as a chemistry instructor, I would say is absolutely necessary. So I'd like to put that on your radar screen to consider. This is only a first read, but it seems that the student will need to have algebra skills in order to be successful in these pre-AP courses, just like they need to have them before they're in Chemistry 1. Because we're dealing with 10th, 11th, and 12th, that's certainly the first year there to be able to get that necessary math into their belt in order to be successful in chemistry. Now, the specific language that's in the description of the courses, there's a phrase that's used called science practices, and I would ask consideration not to change the phrase, although I would suggest we use an adjective for scientific practices instead of science practices, but to include expressly what scientific practices at least include, and that is the scientific method. So perhaps a parenthetical that follows the word practices, including the scientific method. That is something that students, particularly if they're college bound, will need to be skilled with, that type of, that structure of objective reasoning. And then specifically, I do have some draft language suggestions to the pre-AP chemistry honors language, which is paralleled in the pre-AP chemistry language. So both appear to have the same language. Just one's a little more accelerated than the other. And that is in the first sentence. And I wanted to know where the phrase macroscopic observations using particulate level reasoning originated. I don't know, and if we don't, we need time on that, I'm happy to work with you on language that just finesses those phrases. And let me just give you the context of my question, and that is macroscopic isn't necessarily the level that chemistry explores. It's actually much, much more fundamental than that. And the rest of the description contemplates that. And actually, matter and energy are not macroscopic. And then particulate level reasoning, my understanding of what I think is meant here is, and this is a challenge in chemistry, is having people think about atomic level matter. And so we use this generic term particulate or particles, and that can mean atoms, molecules, ions. And so instead of teaching at the level of kind of a survey course, this is blue with a rough texture, you would be teaching at the level, and that's my understanding that this course would do, at the level of atomic bonding level, if not further into subatomic particles. So not to get too technical, but I feel like that phrase, particulate level reasoning, is not necessarily an industry accepted phrase, but I think it's an intent to talk or speak to the level of reasoning is at the particle level, which is something that is a challenge in chemistry. So I think I understand why it's here. I just think the phrase itself is a little awkward. I'll stop there on that section. If you have any thoughts or comments.
Thank you for that explanation as well as the question, Dr. Hartwells. I have had an opportunity to look into the College Board framework a little bit. I am no scientist. And the language in our guide does come from that framework. But I think what it implores upon us is to think about how does it read from somebody outside of the College Board framework. So we can certainly take a look more carefully at how the College Board is describing that course and think about the pedagogy and the conceptual understandings that we're wanting children to understand as a consequence of this course, and make sure they know what they're getting themselves into and their parents understand it too with the course. So I think we can certainly go back and rephrase that and take the concepts of the College Board expectations and rewrite that for our second read.
Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to consider those changes. And any help I can be in a conversation with College Board, I'm happy to do so. I would also now like to turn to the proposed new course, Sports, Exercise, and Health Science, on page 111 of the high school planning guide. Similar question here. This is an opportunity to apply fundamentals. However, at the moment as drafted, there are no prerequisites required, and that seems unusual to me, given there's already a sports medicine class in the CTE offerings, which does not require, and if this is going, so that's CTE, this is a proposal for a core science class. So my question or suggestion is, can we consider, particularly if it's going to be a dual enrollment course, the community colleges don't let you walk into a 200 level course without prerequisites. So a math prerequisite, and in this case, physics and/or geotrig as a math component. I mean, both of those are critical components of understanding these concepts that are articulated in the description of what the course is to be. And I also would suggest that that's particularly important to be delivered by an instructor who has the appropriate certifications. Presumably, dual enrollment wouldn't be offered anyway unless the instructor had the appropriate credentials and was well versed in those same fundamentals that the students would hopefully be required to have before earning their way into this class. So I would like to just, I'll just put that on the table. You can react to it. I realize it's a first read again, and it does look like there's a little bit more work to do in that anyway, because there's a placeholder for the ID. And then a question about maybe not this planning guide iteration, since it's not proposed, but to just react to an observation. I'm now on page 7 of the high school planning guide draft under the graduation requirements. And that is that world language, I appreciate world language now has sign language in it. And my understanding is that that was a student interest generated topic, which is wonderful. And I think this is a nice segue into emerging research that I have been following, and I have articles here, peer review articles, of rethinking what the scope of a world language really looks like. There is emerging research, as you probably know, that learning programming languages is akin to learning a second language, whether that's English or Spanish or Mandarin. And I know, so one, kind of where are we in thinking about that expanded definition? I would suggest, based on what's proposed here, is that we're already rethinking about what world language means, away from kind of your traditional learning a second language, because we've added sign language. So a means of communication. And I would ask that that now also include, if not has already, programming languages, so coding. And I will observe in the graph that while the district does not require any world languages for graduation, the Arizona universities require 2 years. I would imagine that's a good proxy for what other universities are requiring. I mean, I know they are. So that's a pretty big disconnect. It's actually the biggest disconnect we have here on this graduation chart, graduation requirement chart. And so the district's requirements track pretty well to college readiness, except for world language. So with that context, if you want to, if you could just kind of give us where the discussion has been, or maybe there was a reason it wasn't included this year, or it's just one of those things, well, we're working on towards that as the research continues to emerge in this space. But if you could comment on that and kind of where that's headed, I would really appreciate it.
Well, thank you again for the connection between language and skill development for people. I know we've seen that a lot with our second language learners and gifted and talented education with language acquisition. So when we think about that, as we've moved from foreign language to world language, I think we have an opportunity to expand that even further to other languages that are not the typical spoken language, but a coding language that is a totally different type. Because currently, our coding is integrated within our curriculum and our course offerings. So it's a component of either a STEM elective or a game design elective, but it isn't currently as a world language. But certainly something for us to follow up with and look further into.
I guess there's 2 layers to this I see. There's the question about why the world language is not at least 1 year required for the graduation requirements, where again, that gap between the expectations of college readiness from the purview of the university versus our perspective of college readiness. And then there's that separate issue, which I think is the more kind of contemporary issue, which is we're starting to redefine what world language means in today's world. And I think that we need to do that for our students. So I do see this as kind of 2, they're not mutually exclusive components, but 2 kind of different ways to tackle this. And both, I think, are needed. So I would request that conversation. I know it's already started. Continue.
It will. And to follow up with the historical context of SUSD, we can certainly do some research to learn a little bit about the graduation requirements as we've had them here in our district specific to world language.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions. Thank you again for all your hard work. This is exciting.
Thank you. And Board Member Hartwell, it might be helpful if you have anything written down, some suggested edits as well, if you could send those over to aid that discussion.
Yes, I'd already committed to do that
Oh,
with Dr.
okay.
Aaron. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Board Member Beckman.
Okay, thank you. Just like Dr. Hardwell says, I know this is a lot of work. I've myself read through them, and they are a long read, but it's really important. I do agree strongly about the programming. I know some of the competitive private schools in the district or in the area actually require it. So I do appreciate the thought of us maybe kind of reassessing that. Couple of questions. Well, maybe you can address this right now. Ingleside, previously, with regard to the middle school planning guide, had a different schedule previously with regard to electives, et cetera. How are we addressing that, and how are we addressing it in the middle school planning guide, or are we not addressing it now that it may be falling in line with the rest of our middle schools?
Thank you, President Beckman. So,
Board member.
Board Member Beckman, making up all kinds of names tonight. So Dr. Michael has already began the process of looking at a master schedule that is on a 6-period schedule and does allow for students during course selection to look at the full range of the middle school electives as our other middle schools, and make those selections after December break for that 6-period day. So as we've discussed before with the Ingleside Task Force and with others involved in that discussion, it will provide an opportunity for Ingleside students to have another period in their schedules to be able to take up to 2 electives during the course of the school year.
Okay, thank you on that. Now, kind of jumping over to the class rank discussion. First of all, thank you to the Student Advisory Board. I know what hard work you do. I know that you take on these challenging subjects, and you meet quite often and have a rigorous dialogue. I do appreciate that. Having said that, though, I have to say that I know this discussion's been going on for quite some time in this district and had a lot of passionate responses. I, for one, as a board member, really want to hear from our parents about this. Last time I checked, the parents are still paying for college. We're still involved in the application process, and I'd really like to hear what they have to say. This is a controversial topic, and I understand the rationale why I have 2 kids in the arts that definitely weigh those higher credit classes versus taking more of the ones that don't and what it does to the GPA and stuff. So, but we do have to engage our parents and hear their side of it and what's going on in the community with regard to this conversation. So I see the Let's Talk up there. And I know we have survey fatigue, but I would like us to consider it. I would like to hear a narrative on maybe why we wouldn't change, if there is one, just to be open-minded and listen to those families. The second part is just even with regard to this discussion, why are we considering it for this year's freshmen? Why wouldn't we wait until there was a full cycle through high school in case some of those families that were already enrolled in SUSD and those children had made friends and were already on this certain path? Why would we switch it up? Should we decide to make this change?
So the timing is something that high school planning guides, student advisory, that we have kind of volleyed back and forth with. So when we look at when we need to make this decision, our class of 2026, which is our current 8th graders, we are going to very quickly be starting registration for them as well in January. And so in order to even consider using class of 2026, we would have to adopt some sort of language and policy now so that our counseling teams and our site leaders, so that we can advise students appropriately. So that's the first thing. And then through discussions with high school planning guide counselors, site leaders, principals, really at the freshman level, it was kind of, the consensus was reached was that there was still enough time that would allow students to continue on an honors, AP, advanced trajectory, as well as kind of switch their focus and maybe not pursue some of those classes, but still engage in rigorous coursework and be recognized under that Latin honors system.
So that is, in a nutshell, in a very brief, small synopsis of how we arrived at class of 2025.
So, for consideration, since this is a discussion item, I'm kind of hearing both sides of the argument. Meaning, the reason for this discussion, in part, is because you want the students to consider taking classes that they want to take versus being solely focused on weighting their GPA, class rank, et cetera. You may already have freshmen that did that, and potentially, should this pass, then all of a sudden you're telling them that their entire freshman year where they maybe picked classes that were not the ones they would have taken, that they did that and it doesn't matter. Should they have wanted just to go along that valedictorian route or, the ranking, et cetera? And I'm just putting this out there. I'm not necessarily saying that it's an absolute, but just keep that in mind with regard to should this go through, when we would start it. I would like to, if it does pass, we do hear from parents, there is buy-in, that maybe we consider taking our time with it, informing everyone, and starting a little bit later so that parents, when they make those enrollment decisions, when they pick those classes with their students, with their children, they're fully informed about all parameters when they do it. So.
Well, and I think something important to Board Member Beckman is for kids who have set a pathway with their family and with their counselor, we don't want to steer a child away from that pathway. But I remember at one of our student advisory board meetings, listening to a student who told the story at the Math and Science Academy taking engineering and how it was actually a detriment to her for pursuing engineering as opposed to an honors course, but it was her passion. And so that's a highly rigorous course as well for her pathway. And that story really struck me because she made a decision knowing that that would affect her rank because it wasn't going to be a weighted course, which of course then led to a whole nother conversation about weighting courses and not weighting courses. And so I do think, I don't want it to come across as moving to the Latin system of academic recognition is going to devalue any of our courses and it's going to lessen the rigor or the opportunity for kids, but instead allows students really to follow an academic pathway, but also not be penalized for an interest they may also have.
And I appreciate that, and I understand that. And you bring up a compelling point that often in these discussions, you hear a story that resonates, that maybe leaves you with a certain impression then. And that's when my original comment started with, that's why I want to open it up to parents, so we can hear a lot of those stories and then make a decision ourselves. I think while this is timely, and it's certainly appropriate to bring up, I don't think we need to make a rushed decision as it relates to 2 weeks from now, we have to have this going. I get that you're doing the planning guide, but I want to get it right, so.
And to add, for the thought exchange, when we launch it, we do plan it closing on the 22nd, so that we will have time to pull it together when we come back together on the 30th with you to share that information as well that we've gathered over those 2 weeks.
So one last thing, and I'm sorry to monopolize this conversation, but from a parent perspective, are we only using thought exchange, and how will that content be delivered to the governing board?
We were planning to use thought exchange.
Right, but I mean, how are we going to receive the feedback? And is it going to be in total? Is that the only communication that we're bringing to the parents of our community? Are we sending out an email? Meaning, I don't want our parents to have to reach out to the district to figure this out. I want us to touch on them, that this is a conversation.
So I can add a little information to that. So the thought exchange just provides us some more flexibility so we can look for themes. Instead of, yes, I support this, or no, I do not support this. You actually expressed, why would you not, or what are your concerns? So we frame the question in a very specific way to get some context around what people are living in their experiences. And then Thought Exchange actually looks for themes and sorts the information. And then parents can actually, it takes a little bit of the best of social media and gets rid of the worst of it, where you can actually like people's comments if a theme resonates with you and expound on it. So we are going to have this on the website on one of the little banners that rotate. We're going to have it in Dr. Menzel's Friday communication, with a link. And we're really excited to have the students highly engaged through their TV production, as Shrek shared. So encourage their parents, and we'll have students and staff. We also really want to hear from teachers. This definitely is a topic that we don't want to take lightly, and we want to make sure people understand the benefits, the drawbacks. So we're also having, the graphic and some information. So if parents don't understand it, we can just get some more information, some more depth to it, and then we'll be able to give you more than just some statistics on it. We'll be able to share people's thoughts and themes that emerge.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I'm hearing from you, really, the only way we're communicating to parents is through Dr. Menzel's email. I would like a more direct communication, to be honest with you, and I'm speaking personally. I want to understand, before we make this vote, that our parents were told that we were considering this. I would hate to have it come from their student next semester or the semester after, oh, they did away with that. I want to feel confident knowing that they had an opportunity to weigh in at the podium, in an email, not just buried with a link in Dr. Menzel's weekly communication with so many other things, if that makes sense. So that's my ask. Thanks.
We can do direct communication to high school parents that way.
Board Member Hartwells?
I simply just wish to make the point that the class ranks, I think a reason that universities have gone away with emphasizing them or just de-emphasize them, in large part is because you're competing with your peers, and you're not competing with the content. It's another reason why you don't see very many curves in classes anymore, because you're competing with your peers instead of competing with the content. I think you made that point in someone had to go down in order for someone else to go up. And so it was kind of a zero-sum game, and that is understandably not the reason that you achieve academic excellence, right? So I just wish to share that. That is from an educator perspective. It's why we don't use curves.
Vice President Sinowski?
Thank you. I appreciate the comments and conversation here, because this is what we're supposed to be doing before making these important decisions that impact our students' lives. So I have a couple of questions and then some comments, if you will. So question is, based on my own experience, and I have brought this to Dr. Guerin's attention, out of consideration moving forward, that we begin this this process of developing courses that are based on student interest, based on industry needs, and really future focused, that we're not playing catch up, but that we're ahead of the pack here. I think what I would like for us to do is really move this down to a lower level for consideration of new course offerings, and in providing foundations for our students to be successful. I do believe this needs to be starting 6th grade level. When kids come into middle school, they're starting to take their math classes. They're selecting in many places their ELA classes when they have options for alternative courses. Of course, that exploratory focus of the middle school is supposed to be one of the great things that attracts people to show up and engage in middle school. And I'm kind of wondering if we're doing that, because when I look at course offerings, I don't see new, different, unique, with student input, surveys, teachers, offerings, so what are we doing to promote that from that level? It's great at the high school level, but I've often thought it's almost too late when we're introducing some of these exploratory options. They have to register it for high school courses at the beginning of next semester as 8th graders, and they're already kind of establishing their own little personal academic track at that point. So how do we help students and teachers to be creative and offer courses that are going to attract students to our schools rather than the typical type of courses? So that's just kind of my own input on when we do this and why it's important, I think, to start this process earlier. And I love the idea of student surveys. But I also think we need to be working with our industries and projections as our future-focused initiatives really say that we're going to be doing. I personally like the idea of doing away with a GPA as a parent, as far as class rankings. As a parent, I often felt like the conversation was, well, how will that play with my GPA? And I felt like it was very limiting to academic development, intellectual development. Even, you know, some of the kids in the IB program, they do have opportunities for electives. And it always becomes a, well, how will that impact my GPA? How will that impact? And I felt like it kind of cheats kids out of some opportunities. So I do appreciate us going more towards that college academic acknowledgement, the level that the universities use. Granted, not all kids go to the university, nor do they need to, but leads to my next thing. I'm looking at page 93 with the math trajectory of courses. And two things. One is, if you could help me find something that addresses like a consumer math. I've heard parents ask about this in the past, and I've often thought it made sense to have such a course, but I don't see anything like that in our high school math trajectory of courses. If it's not there, because I tried reading, you know, further information on these courses, if it's not there, why not? And can we add it? And then I noticed on the bottom, it says not all courses are available to be offered at all sites. I understand that. I understand that courses take teachers to have the courses run. It also takes a certain amount of enrollment, of interest, student interest, to have a course make. So if we have some of these outlier courses, specifically at the higher level of mathematics, and they're only offered on a campus or two, is there a method that we are going to ensure that students have the support of our district to get them into that class on that campus? And I'm not talking about a video link to the class where they're sitting in a carrel, or I'm not talking about telling them they have to go to the community college to take their advanced math courses, or to one of the local universities, but in our district. So if a child, with my experience, there were a lot of kids in our gifted program who kind of got to a point where they worked through all the math classes by the time they got to their senior year, and there were really no offerings for them. And I think we're really letting some of our top academic mathematicians down in that area. So what are we doing, and can we ensure that maybe through scheduling, I don't know what that looks like, but I think the counselors and the teachers and you all can work that out, where we are ensuring that our mathematicians are allowed to take the top courses, even if it means there are 6 kids in that class, because I think that's really important to continue those options, whether it's math or science or theater or language, or whatever it is. And I love the idea of computer. And I don't, most of you that know me know I'm not a person that likes to wait on things. It's a good idea, let's go with it. Because otherwise it means 2 years before our students have these options. And I don't want that to happen, because that's a lot of kids that miss out on those learning opportunities.
Board Member Sinowski,
Yes.
we've been talking about using the cameras when there's only 6 kids at one campus that want to take a class, and we have it offered in another class, that we have supervision, but that the teacher manages students. And so those are just some pilot ideas that we're looking at, because now that we have this new technology, we can really think outside the box and break the barriers of the 4 classroom walls.
I have a hard time with that because I think when you're talking about such advanced level technical mathematics, it's not providing the student with the immediate feedback that to keep them interested in being successful in those upper level courses. I understand that's an option, but it's the same thing with our world languages. It's like, is that the best we can do? And I know it's about money, I get that. But, we're here to have this conversation because this is where we do our work. So I just shared a lot. I'm available to help however I can, and my interest is always going to be with providing our students with comprehensive intellectual development based on their own needs and interests. And so whatever we all can do to promote that and support that, that's where I sit and stand. That's it.
Board Member Lindsay?
Yeah, while we're on this topic, sports classes, it's foreign to me. So on here, a student could take it sophomore, junior, and senior year. Are there freshmen who take that as well?
Are you talking about
Just a sports class.
like a football class
Yes.
or a basketball
Yes.
class? So PE is the prerequisite for those sports-specific classes. So
But-
theoretically, if you've met that prerequisite, you could have a freshman in a basketball class.
Even if it
because-
says 10th, 11th, and 12th.
Yes.
So we might want to update that
Yeah,
and put
we can
9th.
do that.
And then does that limit potentially someone getting into a college or university if they see all these sports classes? Would the college be a little bit critical on that? Because I've heard of that happening.
I can't speak specifically as to how a college would interpret a transcript and the rigor of the courses. However, all of our courses they go through the NCAA vetting, clearinghouse vetting process. So in that regards, they are all considered appropriate for an NCAA athlete. They make it through the clearinghouse process. So, if you have a plethora of sports classes on your transcript, because that's what you are interested in, I would hope that your academics also are shining through, even though you are maybe not exploring CTE, engineering, music theory, world language. But if that's what you're passionate about, then certainly your other academic areas, your personal essays, your community service, your letters of recommendation, your SAT, ACT test scores, all of that's going to add to the full picture when you go to get accepted to college.
But not all kids on a sports team, they may not want to take 9 courses of a sport, but they feel
Correct.
an obligation to the team.
Correct.
With the class rank discussion, would you feel that if someone has to take 9 courses of a sports class, that kind of limits their options to get out and have to explore other courses?
So with the proposed change in class rank, we move from an academic GPA to an overall GPA. So taking those sports classes will actually add to their GPA and their academic recognition.
I know, but I'm just talking about like nudging them to like, hey, go take a foreign language, or you don't.
Yes, we absolutely do that as part of the advising process. I can't speak for what happens on every single site, but I've spent a lot of time with counselors from different sites as part of the high school planning guide process, and they're all advising them based on like what is in their best interest and their future goals and what they want to do to be successful in whatever post-secondary option they select. So I do know that that is a core component of the advising that our guidance counselors district-wide believe in. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Board Member Hart-Wells?
Sorry, I'm back. I had one question I did not get to ask, and then I wanted to ask a question about timeline, because Board Member Beckman rose, there need to have some clarity on what is our timeline here. I didn't think it was super urgent timeline, but if we can get there after the following. Visual arts course sequence update has added some additional visual arts courses to offerings to the students. sometimes, when we do this, we offer the course selections and there's not enough students to warrant getting a new teacher. So one teacher ends up carrying loads of multiple courses in the same period, and that obviously is not ideal. And so what kinds of ideas or thoughts do you have on ways we might offer a different path and still keep these offerings, the breadth of offerings, but maybe the process is the process part of the issue here? But it just seems like there should be a better way than having a teacher teach 3 different courses in a 50-minute time slot. Could you share, please?
Sure. Board Member Hartwells, I think this actually parallels what Board Member Sanowski brought up too with advanced mathematics. And so we often have small groups of students who are taking a particular art course, or they're an incredible musician, an advanced mathematician, and they are an outlier. So then we just put them either into a course that allows them to participate, but maybe not at their level of excellence. And so I hesitate in some respects with some experiences I've had previously where we go to our governing board, we go to our superintendent, we go to our HR, and we talk about what are the needs in our schools, and can we take a risk in offering a course with small numbers of students and build it. And the old adage, if you build it, they will come. And I think the same is true for electives that are of high interest to kids, as well as courses. And if we have appropriately rigorous courses in a pathway, then we will have more than the 1 or the 2 or the 3 children who would be eligible for advanced academic coursework, just as well as the interest-based electives for students. Because again, our kids, we're preparing them to go to college or into a career, and I might be applying to a school of music, and maybe my pathway is limited because of what is available at my school. And so I think we need to be mindful of that and see what are the needs, and it does go back to what are our students longing for, and how can we ensure that what we are designing in our schools isn't what we are today, but where we want to go. And that is a conversation I know I've briefly had with Dr. Menzel as well, about thinking about our strategic plan and what our visioning is, and how do we rethink our current systems. And when we think about even, say, world language, my hope is that coding isn't something that's a fun Friday activity, that it's something that's integrated into our units of study, and that it's not just down a hallway, but it's something that is available to children in our classrooms. So that language that children develop as preschoolers and kindergartners and first graders, by the time they're seniors like Trex, it's their vernacular, and they've discovered a passion, and they've probably already started their own small business before they've entered college. So, I think we have a lot of really neat opportunities, and it sounds like we have a lot of support from you too.
And I want to add to that just a little bit, if I can. The sign language is a perfect example of a student interest that began, and we were able to offer that through SOL, through electives. So you have students with an interest, and we have this dynamic list of e-learning classes for the electives where kids get to pick and choose their veterinary science, their sign language, a number of different things. And now look at the momentum it has gained to where we have to go out and hire a full-time, certified sign language teacher, because that student interest has gained that momentum, and now we are offering this course to many more students. So we're fortunate to have SOL. It's, of course, it's, online courses is not for everybody, but it is an option for those high-level interest courses, and with classes that the sections don't make on every single campus.
I appreciate that. I want to keep pulling this thread, though. I'm a big fan of SOL, but I will also say it may not be for everyone, but there's also certain subject matters that lend themselves more easily to online learning than others. And particularly in this visual arts, I would say, it would not help me, but I'm also not very artistic. But to go back to teacher, I'd say overload, almost. In my understanding of the process is that you have to we have to meet a threshold, a critical mass of students before a new teacher can be brought on. Is that right? Is that correct?
There are general guidelines in terms of student-teacher ratios at all levels. and then expectations in terms of what we can sustain. So it's not that we don't have unlimited resources, and so when Board Member Sanowski talked about a class making, if you only have 6 students interested, sometimes we're not able to continue offering that. And so it's more complicated than just saying it's the student-teacher ratio. We do have some classes that are small that way, but we can't go to scale with every class with those numbers because we just don't have sufficient resources, and/or in the current environment, we also struggle to find some of the teachers to teach those classes.
Okay, fair enough. Is it possible to have these, a proof of concept year to test some of these courses with an instructor where the teacher-student ratio is small for data gathering, empirical proof of concept, instead of adding it to an existing teacher's load to figure out the 3-class curriculum at the same time? Is that possible? Or we might be getting down in the weeds here, but it seems to me like that would be one possibility to explore if it's not already.
So it's possible, and there are qualifiers. So earlier tonight, we talked about our interest-based negotiations. We have a fixed amount of money that's available, but driven in large part by the number of students we have. We divvy that up. 85% of our budget is tied to staff compensation, salaries and benefits at all levels of the organization. So any decision we make at the high school level to do this means that there is less money available at other parts of the system. And so absent that review of the entire system, it's hard to say, yes, we can or should do that. But as a district, we've offered new courses, we've identified ways to be able to pilot projects, and we've actually been able to leverage the ESSER funding to do some of this work to say, here's an idea that's potentially scalable. We've got federal funding that allows us to actually see what its impact is, but it doesn't take away from the M&O dollars that are limited in what we have available. So I think the answer is a qualified yes, depending on what the topic is. But we've been, as a matter of practice, looking at how do we pilot in order to scale, and can we sustain it over time?
Okay, I appreciate there's always a resource consideration, and there should be, right, even if you had a lot. This is just something I think that we could further discuss and understand. And proof of concept doesn't have to be big and expensive to be meaningful. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Dr. Dodds.
Vice President Sanowski?
Thank you.
Did you have?
I just wanted to get some feedback on timeline. What kind of timeline are we on for approval? When do you need the guide approved?
So course registration will start very, very quickly at the 5 high schools in Seoul, of course. So in terms of the course guide as a whole, ideally it is approved before the semester ends so that we can start that process. Should we need to pull back on an item like class rank to ensure that we have full stakeholder input and such, we do have wiggle room in that aspect of the timeline, but the actual planning guides themselves, counselors and APs of Ed services, we really need those guides before the semester closes so that we can register our kids, we can, have academic expectations nights, we can go through that whole process and start building that, because we're backwards planning from when Dr. Bowman and HR, when we have to have those staffing conversations and we build student-centered schedules. And so we really need it before the semester closes. I'm sorry.
Vice President Sanowski?
Thanks. Something that you said, Dr. Menzel, made me think of this. We're talking about lots of great opportunities for our students, and there's only so much kids can fit into their schedules every year. Maybe with the ESSER funds, and it's going to give us some breathing room to maybe think of our school year differently. I know typically our summer sessions are particular courses. Maybe we look at offering some of these unique enrichment learning opportunities in the summer. Just something to consider.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? Our current vision, or if I'm correct, is to address world-class, future-focused learning. So my question is, when you look at these courses we offer, and when you look at this class rank system, and I do not know, to be frank, how if all the different high schools use the same system. There was no valedictorian at Arcadia High School when I graduated. We weren't even grouped by class rank. It was just alphabetical, but certain groups like student government got their diplomas first just because we spoke at graduation and were up front. But beyond that, I mean, our transcript had what our rank was, but it was never publicized anywhere else. And I did not know our transcript had that until I was required to apply for a job and provide it. Have we looked at what other high-performing school systems do in terms of course offerings, class rank, grading system? I know there are entire districts in California that are revising how they do assessments and grades. I am quite used to the, first, second, third ranking system, grading system for mastery of a subject, close to mastery, good, not good. What have we done in terms of that, in terms of the more outward approach to make sure that not only are our practices something that our students and staff and parents support, but something that brings us in line with Mark Tucker's Leading High-Performing School Systems, the philosophy that we're trying to embody here.
Do you want to talk a little bit about class rank research?
Yeah, so in terms of what other districts are doing, a lot of districts are having these conversations right now, especially coming out of the pandemic and the rethinking of teaching and learning and what that means at the secondary level. When we really dived into this, we looked closely at Chandler Unified, because Chandler Unified has actually already done away with rank and is using the Latin system of honors. Other districts in the Valley are looking at standards-based grading. Our neighboring districts are still ranking. In terms of graduation and what happens at graduation, each site has some flexibility with what they do. Most sites are at least acknowledging, as you've seen at Coronado High School, the top 1%, 5%, and 10% of their class, as well as those other areas or students who earned high achievement in earning the Seal of Biliteracy, the Fine Arts Seal, CTE, Certificates of Completion, graduating from EVIT as well. All of that is included in the graduation program, the graduation ceremony itself, but each site does it a little bit differently. So in terms of what is definitively happening at all of our neighboring districts, I can't speak to that for sure. I can say that Chandler has moved away from class rank altogether, and that other neighboring districts are having these same conversations, which is in part why when we started this conversation, we wanted to lead the way with this and be first, maybe not first, Chandler was first, but lead the way with these efforts to really look holistically at celebrating academic achievement, if that makes sense.
So it does make sense, but I just want to be clear that the answer is we have not looked outside of neighboring districts in Arizona itself.
No, not outside of Arizona.
We can.
We can though, absolutely.
I would like to, I understand we're developing our strategic plan, and I understand that, the KPIs, but some of those aren't even related to that. Some of them are cultural changes in the way we discuss student performance, the way we teach and assess students on their growth throughout the year, as opposed to, penalizing them with a quiz here or a missed homework assignment there, and rather focusing on kind of the end-of-term assessment or the meaningful one to show, yes, over the course, you really have mastered this content or haven't. So I would be interested in seeing some of the perspectives that other states, districts in other states have adopted, and frankly, that international perspective to the extent that we can review materials on that. It's, class rank, if universities and colleges don't really look at it anymore for the reasons that Board Member Hart-Wells has cited and the reasons that our administration has cited, that certainly makes sense to me. It might not make sense to parents and others who are used to doing things a certain way, which is common. That's, one of the things we're working on in our strategic planning design team. But I would like to see kind of that outward perspective, because I really do think that Scottsdale Unified School District is in a great position to knock it out of the park. And I think that would really bring in that diversity of thought. Beyond that, I think we've spent quite a bit of time on this topic, and any further comments I have, I can send to you via email, but it looks like we might have to do a second or third read on this for sure, and wrap this up by December is the hope. And if any board members, Board Member Hart-Wells is already committed to sending over documents, but if there are any other changes that board members would like to see, please do send those over via email, because I think that's maybe easiest in terms of changing phrasing. Well, thank you very much. Have a great night. The board will now move to information discussion item 3C, first read of proposed revisions to policy BEDD, public participation at board meetings. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg and members of the governing board. I'd like to invite General Counsel Lori Bird up. She can provide an introduction to the next two agenda topics related to policies for a first read.
Good evening, members of the governing board. Hopefully my slides made it here. They did. Let me pull up the first policy. This is a first read on this policy, so you're going to get a little bit more of a presentation. I direct your attention to the very bottom of policy BEDD. This is the only revision or change. This is an Arizona School Board Association recommended change to this policy. What it says is that under rules of order, that the governing board president, should there be a disruption at the meeting, does not have to take a vote, but can simply dismiss the meeting, recess the meeting in order that decorum can be maintained. That is the only revision to this particular policy.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Board Member Beckman and then Board Member Hart-Wells.
So thank you for bringing this forward. I'm going to have to say I disagree with this. If I personally take the time as a board member to speak to our community on issues, research and prepare for a meeting, I would like the 5 seconds it would take to recess a meeting and to be able to vote on it. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so what this is as I'm understanding, is that if there's violations of the rules of decorum, to maintain decorum, to maintain order, that the board president on their own, or her own, or his own, may recess the meeting, and then when order is restored, the board can reconvene. It's not voting on the topic that's before the board. It's simply being able to take a recess without taking the time to take a full vote before that recess occurs.
Oh, I understand it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Board Member Hart-Wells.
I have a question about the term decorum. So we had approved a few board meetings ago, decorum commitment.
Yes, ma'am.
And my question is the word decorum sufficiently described to have clarity for what decorum means without putting what we've already voted on in the policy? Because we didn't put it into policy when we made that vote.
Correct.
So I'm trying to connect the dots on how what's enforceable.
So the word decorum wasn't particularly chosen by myself. The word decorum was in the suggested Arizona School Board Association language. Certainly, as a board, and this is a first read, as you know, we can discuss any changes that you might want to see in this policy. I can present something different to you, or we can keep it the same. It's really your opportunity for feedback on this first read.
I guess my feedback is that the term decorum, is it too non-specific? Is it specific enough? Is it defined sufficiently for there to be consistent application of the policy? And I understand that this proposal is a fail-safe, right? This is a last resort. We certainly would not want to get into a situation where we needed to do that, but unfortunately, back in May, we were in a situation where we had to do that. So this is a reality, unfortunately. But I just want to make sure that we understand what the metes and the bounds of what this permission is, and if we might have some clarity around what that term decorum means. And I don't have proposed language, but we are in a first read, so if that's something that we're interested in, I would direct our attention to what we've already approved in terms of what's defined as decorum. And we had a healthy discussion on that definition.
Are there any board member questions or comments? Board Member Lindsay?
Yeah, I'd just like to hear from Dr. Menzel if you'd like to weigh in. I mean, do you feel like this change is needed?
So I would say that my understanding of why ASBA recommended it is because of what we saw maybe in Vail, when you actually had people who were armed and came into the room and they needed to do something quickly. And I think the addition is designed to eliminate a procedural barrier to taking action that would ensure the safety and well-being of all involved. I would certainly hope we never have to use it. And to Lori Bird's comment, I think this is only about recessing in that kind of emergency situation. And so I think this issue of decorum is one of scale and magnitude. This really is intended to be a last resort provision, and one just to make sure that there's safety in the room if something like that were to happen. Fortunately for us, we didn't have the Vail situation, but we've read about other places around the country where people have been hit and other kinds of things, and if procedurally we have to take a motion and a second and then do a roll call or whatever the voting mechanism is, that just may not be necessary if something like that were to happen. I don't envision it in the future, but this would allow that to allow the president to be able to make that decision on the fly.
Vice President Sinowski?
Would it be beneficial to replace the word decorum with something like safety?
I am open to whatever changes that you'd like to propose. Again, I can come back on a second read with a look at whatever changes you'd like to propose. So safety, if you want language addressing kind of not just your basic, people have raised their voices or whatever, but clarifying a little more that it's more of an emergency situation, I'm happy to do that.
For consideration, could we, if we have ideas, a little bit of time to think this through, just forward those to you, Lori?
Excuse me, I didn't hear you.
Would it be okay then if we had some time to stew this over a little bit? I see where there's that, how direct is that language?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can think of a better word and just forward it to you if we have ideas.
Yes.
Thank you.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? I certainly have no issue rephrasing changing ASBA's language to, or recommendation to, specific emergency actions, safety, threat. I mean, if I may, in May, I couldn't even hear you guys. I mean, I was looking at your mouths to see if you were saying "I," and I don't know if you could even hear me. And, while the individuals who caused that disruption like to claim that they did not feel in jeopardy of their safety, it wasn't their safety that we were concerned with. It was the other individuals who did feel unsafe in that room and were leaving before the meeting. We could not even do our celebrations because those students and staff left. I mean, even if we held the meeting, they left. So, I do understand ASBA's language. I do agree that decorum and rules of order probably too vague, and I do think it should be an emergency action. That wasn't a vote that I called, just to be, again, on the record, because, just to be very clear, that was not an action that I called on myself. We consulted with our security services, with the superintendent, and with our counsel, who gave me advice that the best thing to do would be to recess the meeting to protect everyone's safety. So, we took the vote. I do think voting is important in general, but if there is a veil situation or something else, I do understand ASBA's point that you probably can't just sit in there and vote. So I think Board Member Hartwell's and Vice President Sanowski make a very good point that we could tighten that language up and move it to emergency language, and maybe I can put together some examples or something, and we can bring it back for a second
Any
reading.
suggestions are welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
If it's okay with you, President Brinkenberg, I'll just stay here.
You know what? I think that makes a lot of sense. The board will now move to information discussion item 3D, first read of proposed revisions to policy BEDH, public participation at board meetings.
Again, I want to call your attention, most of this is not changed. There is a recommendation by ASBA, which obviously I'm bringing it before you for your consideration. So it may have some validity, but that's up to you. This one is targeted at presentations for unsolicited services will not be permitted. Companies or businesses offering services of possible interest to the district should send information to the district office for distribution to appropriate school district officials. What I want to stress here is this is not a restriction on speech. What it is a time and place convention for those businesses that may want to come before the board to sell a particular or offer a service. In fact, it may be a service that the board is interested in. We have procurement provisions for that. It is just not the time and place in a board meeting for a business to come and pitch their product to the board outside of our regular procurement process when we haven't invited them there to hear about whatever particular product they're selling. It also promotes some unfairness because we simply couldn't have a long line of salespeople, be it their home business or be it a very large corporation, coming in and spending great amount of time giving their 3-minute elevator speech, because this is under our public comment portion. And so this isn't a restriction on anyone's free speech. People are still free to speak on topics related to the community, related to the board, related to the agenda. What it does is redirect those that would like to sell something or consider us selling something to the appropriate process for that.
Thank you. Any board member questions or comments? Board Member Beckman?
I understand it and I appreciate it. I just want to make a point. I've been watching these board meetings for probably 10 years, and I don't think I have ever, I could be wrong, someone else could refresh me here, seen someone try and sell something from the podium. So just so we know, should this eventually, we talk about this later and vote on this, it's just a matter, I guess, of making that clear. But just to our community, I don't think we have a problem with people doing that in Scottsdale, but if it is just some sort of cleaning up the language just for the future, just so people are aware, so be it. But I just want to make that clear that this is for discussion, not because we've had someone necessarily sell something on a continual basis from the podium.
Correct. And again, this was suggested, ASBA, said, hey, this is for your consideration. It's certainly for your consideration. If it's something that you all as the board don't feel is necessary, then certainly it will not be. There's nothing mandatory about this, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not, we won't be violating any statute if that's not in there.
Board Member Hart-Wells.
I look at this as ensuring efficient use of taxpayer resources in part, because when you're on camera at the public comment period, you are being live streamed out, and it is an opportunity to potentially take advantage of those taxpayer resources in a way that weren't intended. So that's how I view this. It's not because we are worried that someone's going to line up and do their marketing through our public comment period, but it's a business, I guess, a good business call, in my opinion, in terms of the proper use of taxpayer resources. That's how I look at it. Thank you, Ms. Bird.
Thank you.
Board Member Lindsay.
Yeah, just curious, do you know how they came to this now? Like, was there something that happened in another district where they had a problem with people trying to sell things? I'm just trying to wrap my head around why it came now.
I think because there have been, and I can't cite day, time, or even district, some unsolicited service presentations related to the pandemic with people trying to sell different items to a district that's related to some kind of COVID mitigation. And I think this is just ASBA's recognition and recommendation that the board has the ability to direct those people to the appropriate process, as opposed to having it come forward in the public comment portion of a board meeting.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments about board policy BEDH, public participation at board meetings? Just a reminder that any changes, we can propose anything on these policies. It is an interesting change, although it doesn't really change much for us, since I think I've only seen it once at a board meeting. I would like to stress to the public again that topic restrictions are constitutional, and that when we do hold a public hearing on a matter required by law, public comments are constitutionally limited to that topic of discussion. And the fact that I or any board president have to enforce that in order to keep our meetings efficient is simply the policy that we're following, and it is the law. I will say, because I've never visited this board policy, I don't think, other than for removing some language I had challenged earlier in 2019. Is there any desire to change our public comment policy in general? It's been a hot topic of conversation in our agenda setting meetings. There have been questions raised about topic restrictions, that you can only comment on topics that the board can deal with, as we saw in Chandler. That issue was raised very recently due to some very anti-Semitic comments and other bigoted comments. We've dealt with it in our own district. Is there any desire to address those things, or do we feel that allowing our public to come and say whatever is on their mind is what we want to keep doing? I'm asking just because I would like some direction, as opposed to constantly arguing about this in private. Vice President Sanowski.
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I wasn't thinking about that when I'm just reading the proposed revisions to this policy. I think as a board,
function for public schools. We serve a variety of students and families in our district. And, you know, you mentioned what happened in Chandler, and I'd just like to say that kind of the decorum, I think, gets tossed aside. When board decorum, I personally would not sit by and listen to someone harming children and families in our district. So that makes me think that maybe there needs to be, I see this personal attacks, but this talks about board members, staff personnel, other persons in attendance or absent. I think that's very appropriate for this to cover, but maybe we, you know, I'd like some time to stew on this a little bit too, because I think it's really important for us as a community public school board to make very clear that, yes, people have their 3 minutes or however long that we decide our public comment time period is, whether it's a minute because there are 30 speakers, whatever, but that they understand that the purpose of our governing board public comment is not to be viewed as a counseling session for what's bugging you that day, and that this, everything that's being said, this is my opinion, that everything being said in our governing board meetings should always be centered back to our students, best interest of our students, and of course that's the best interest of our staff. So someone coming and you know, talking about whatever they want, I think is not, I think we really need to address this. And I think it's something that's always been that outlier of, yeah, it really is something we need to address, but we really haven't, and maybe this is the appropriate policy to address that.
Are there any other questions or comments on that? Board Member Hart-Wells?
I staying with the theme of what I view as misuse of taxpayer resources, which I do believe the public comment period at the school district is a taxpayer resource funded, taxpayer funded resource, get that turned around there, is the use of that time as a platform for personal agendas that are not directly related to the business of the district. The point of the meetings that we have are for the proper governance of the district. So understanding that scope, and it seems to be just at least recently, the scope of the time we're spending listening is beyond the scope of what we're here to do and what we have the authority to even weigh in on as a governing board as a whole, as opposed to individuals. It's unfortunate that that's happening. I prefer that it not, and that we not have to have these conversations, but I do think it falls into the misuse of taxpayer resources if we were to ignore what's been happening in certain circumstances in terms of the public comment period.
Thank you. Board Member Beckman?
Okay, I did not know we were going to have a broader topic discussion tonight with regard to this policy. To be honest, I thought we were going to be discussing, and I know it can be a little bit broad, whether or not we were in agreement with regard to the language that was suggested. This broader topic is kind of a slippery slope for me as far as legal. We were talking about free speech at the podium, what is allowed, not allowed, our community members, et cetera. So if you want to table this and give us time to actually, well, it's not even being voted on, so it doesn't need to be tabled, but clearly we can have a second read, because I would like to get some counsel, gather my thoughts, because this is, allowing our public comment is pretty sacred. So I want to make sure that we treat it appropriately. It's First Amendment, et cetera, and I understand your concerns, Dr. Hart-Wells. But I think it is worthy of greater thought if we're going to have a discussion about this.
Thank you. Board Member Hart-Wells?
I just want to ask Ms. Bird if you could just confirm, we're not statutorily, the governing board is not statutorily required to have public comment. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's
Thank
that is correct. A governing board meeting does not have to have a call to the public. However, if it does have a call to the public, obviously, there are parameters in which that call to the public must operate. But no, there is no requirement under open meeting law or any other statute that a school board governing meeting include public comment. Let me caveat that a little bit, because there are certain times within the statute when we're required to hold a public hearing on a specific topic. A public hearing is a little different than a governing board meeting where we're allowing the public just to come in and speak on a wide variety of concerns that they have. And sometimes, yes, those are statutorily required in different circumstances on different topics.
Thank you for clarifying that nuance. I appreciate that.
Board Member Beckman?
While though it's not legally required, when we do open it up and we do allow for speech on non-agenda items, we do have to be careful in what we limit, correct? It's non-agenda items. People routinely come before the board to talk about what's on their mind, what's happening in the district, et cetera. I just want to be very careful with this. This is something, and while I absolutely respect the opinions of my fellow board members, et cetera, I personally want to take some time before we get into this on a broader level, because it is something that needs to be really thought through.
Board Member Hartwells?
I agree. It definitely is something that needs to have a broader conversation, and I don't think anyone's suggesting that there not be a public comment. I just wanted to make sure that we're all clear on our statutory requirements and that we adhere to those. Of course, these are compliance policies, right? So I would agree, and this isn't I don't think anyone's, well, I'm not advocating we don't have public comment, but it needs to be constructive public comment so that we use time and resources wisely. So I'll end there, but I just want to clarify, no one's suggesting anything, I think, seismic, but rather a rethink in light of our current, what we've lived through the last 6 months. Thank you.
Vice President Sanowski?
And Lori, thank you for clarifying the difference between our public governing board meetings and our public hearings. I think there's been some misunderstanding of input during the two different meetings, and assuming that the conversation is open during a public hearing, per se, versus a governing board public comment portion of our board meetings. So I appreciate you stating that again, that during our public hearings, that the comments are expected to be about that single subject hearing that is being held.
Correct.
Thank you.
Are there any, Board Member Lindsay?
Yeah, I'm not going to belabor things. The whole public comment thing just makes me a little uncomfortable. So it would require a lot of thought about what would possibly happen. But when it gets to public comment, I am a little uncomfortable changing things as it stands.
Thank you. Are there any other board member questions or comments? Well, thank you for that discussion. It seems like there is enough interest to look at some and explore some options. I would say that my main concern is not so much about the content of the comments, although obviously that content does concern me, especially when employees are being accused of activities they did not commit. But beyond that, I think what I'm concerned about based on the May meeting and where this all stems from the discussions that people have brought to me is really, and specifically, individuals who do not live in our district, do not pay taxes in our district, do not have kids in our district, do not work in our district, have no relation to our district, coming over here and making comments. And there is precedent for geographical restrictions on speakers, because it does waste our time when someone is complaining to us about a book that we do not even teach from a district that we do not represent. So I think, there are certain things, but I do want to remind the board and the public that it was Board Member Beckman and I, just 2 years ago, that completely revised, or actually a year ago, the public comment policies and got it to where they were. They used to be, at the time they're allotted now, people had their 3 minutes, and then it was shifted to the end of the meeting, basically, to stop people from speaking. And when we did come on the board, we addressed unconstitutional language that was in their restrictions, and we moved the comment time back so that the greatest number of members of the public could participate. And it's a little frustrating that that narrative has been incorrectly assigned or incorrectly described to this administration, which has worked very hard to create accessibility with our community, and this board, which has done the exact same thing. But as I said earlier, coming to meetings and making it impossible for us to even hear each other is not exactly, there's nothing we can do at that point. Council, I think what we'll do is maybe we will discuss some possible language or some ideas. I think Board Member Hartwells and Vice President Sanowski can submit questions or some ideas, Board Member Beckman as well, and then we can maybe provide some optional language or something for further discussion. Thank you. The board will now move to agenda item 4, action items 4A, second read and approval of revisions to policy JK student discipline. Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments on this policy?
None unless there are questions for Lori Bird.
Are there any questions or comments about these revisions? Board Member Hartwells.
I just have
Go ahead,
I
Board
believe
Member
it's
Hartwells. I'm
a-
pulling up the policy, and I pulled up the wrong one. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. Once you get there, are you there?
I'm there.
Page 2, at the top of page 2, the subparagraph B, I believe there's an or charter school phrase that was not
You are
caught.
correct.
Okay,
You are correct.
okay. And that was it. Thank you. I do see that you have proposed language in response to my request about training at the end of the policy.
That is correct. You
Thank
will
you.
find that language highlighted in blue at the bottom of the policy for your consideration.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments about this revision? The chair moves to approve action item 4A, second read and approval of revisions to policy JK student discipline. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 4A, second read and approval of revisions to policy JK student discipline as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to action item 4B, second read and approval of revisions to policy JKD, student suspension. Are there any questions or comments? Dr. Menzel, do you have any questions or comments? Do any board members have any questions or comments?
And I just want to highlight for you and the public that the same language regarding training was also added to this particular policy.
Hearing none, the chair will move to approve action item 4B, second read and approval of revisions to policy JKD, student suspension. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded to approve action item 4B, second read and approval of revisions to policy JKD, student suspension. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to action item 4C, second read and approval of revisions to policy JKE, expulsion of students. Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments? Do any board members have any questions or comments? Hearing none, the chair will, sorry.
No, I was
Apologies,
just
Counselor.
going to point to the language that was added, just to make sure we're clear and the public is clear. We did add an alternative to expulsion at the request of the board that mirrors the alternative to suspension language that's in JKD, and we added the language about training as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, the chair moves to approve action item 4C, second read and approval of revisions to policy JKE, expulsion of students. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 4C, second read and approval of revisions to policy JKE, expulsion of students as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to action item 4D, approval revisions to policy IHAMB, family life education. Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments? Do any board members have questions or comments? Board Member Beckman.
Ms. Bird, can you touch on this again? I know I've emailed and you guys have given me some responses about the previous policies, and I do appreciate that. But what exactly we are voting on with this policy tonight, the additions, so that people can be aware it's aligning to what the state is recommending, correct? Can you
Correct.
kind of just,
Well, it's not that the state is recommending it, the state is telling
yeah,
us
I'm
that.
sorry, yes.
That we have.
Have
So in contrast to sometimes ASBA recommends some language, this is actually statutory
Right.
language that says any school district or charter school can no longer introduce or teach sex education before the 5th grade. Our existing policy had language in it that made it appear as if we were providing sex education in grades K through 5. We weren't, but the policy read that way. So this aligns both to practice and to statutory requirements. It also sets forth the statutory requirements for the adoption of any new sex education curriculum and makes it very, very clear that this is an opt-in provision, that parents must opt their child in to any sex ed curriculum that is being taught within the district after that grade, minimum grade level.
thank you.
Board Member Hart-Wells.
Thank you, Ms. Bird. There are a couple of typos, I think. I don't know if you will agree with me. If we can look at that body paragraph there in the middle of the page, before a parent provides written permission. The second sentence starts, the school district notify parents. Is the word shall missing?
On the very first page,
Yes, ma'am. Page 1.
the school
right in the
district shall
middle.
make,
So before a parent.
probably, yes.
Okay, and then the next paragraph down, a school districts with existing sex education curricula, should that just be singular, a school district? And then the title, as I understand it, policy IHAMB amends existing policy to comply with newly amended ARS 15711 titled Sex Education Instruction and ARS 15113 titled Rights of Parents. And for the community, those are cited on the board agenda item for you. I also note that the policy title for policy IHAMB is not consistent with the title of the relevant state statute on which this policy is proposed to comply. I also note that all the other policies that are being considered this evening have a title that makes clear to the public what the policy contains. As we know, this very issue, as it pertains to state law, has been recently adjudicated by both the Maricopa Superior Court and just last week by the Arizona Supreme Court. In light of this, is there any reason to not make the title for policy IHAMB reconciled to the title of ARS 15711 and ARS 15113 as amended, such as, for example, sex education and rights of parents? And just as a further note, as a pragmatic person and favor efficiency, I did learn from ASBA that the current index, which they use, Index for National School Policy Classifications, classifies policy IHAMB as titled Sex Education. So the title of the relevant state statute would be consistent with the current classification of the National Educational Policy Network, in addition to the verb tenses that I've already pointed out. So my question is there a reason to not make this an intuitive title that reconciles to the state statute and to the National Educational Policy Network's policy classifications?
There's no legal reason not to change the title. I do not know the history of this particular title and why it was chosen for the Scottsdale policy, but certainly if the board would like to change the title of the policy, they certainly have the authority to do so.
I'll just add a little historical context based on my conversation with the current interim policy director at ASBA, is the family life education and sex education was the original title 20 years ago of this policy, which is probably where this title came from. It just hasn't been updated, but it has been updated in other informative documents.
If I may, so the proposed changes are to to change family life education to sex education, the title.
And corresponding rights of parents.
Sex education and corresponding rights of parents.
That's my proposal, but
Okay.
because it tracks the state statute.
That's fine. So we have tonight a proposal to amend this to read sex education and corresponding rights of parents. In paragraph 4, we have added the word shall before the word notify. In the following paragraph, we have amended the word districts to district. And were there any other amendments tonight? Can we vote to approve this policy as amended? Is there any opposition to the proposed amendments by Board Member Hartwells? There is no opposition. Are there any further questions or comments on the policy as amended? I would just like to reiterate for the public's benefit that at our previous board meeting, a parent had complained about a regulation that is no longer up to date. Those comments, however, I just want to be very clear that Scottsdale Unified School District is a public school district. We are a secular government institution. We are neither pro-religion nor anti-religion. Whatever you believe is your choice. But if you are looking for a religious school, Arizona is also a school of choice, and there are plenty of parochial schools that parents can attend. But as far as the U.S. Constitution is concerned, the Supreme Court has made it very clear that same-sex couples are legally permitted to marry. With that, Board Member Hartwells, would you like to make a motion to approve the revisions to policy IHAMB, family life education as amended?
I would, President Greenberg, thank you. I'd like to make a motion to approve the revisions to policy IHAMB as amended this evening. Is there a second?
I second. It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 4E, approval revisions to policy JFB approval revisions 4D, approval revisions to policy IHAMB, family life education. To reiterate to the public, those changes will be to the title, sex education and corresponding parents' rights. In the fourth paragraph, adding the word shall notify. The school district shall notify. In the following, I believe the word shall should be on the other side of the district.
Yep. Yeah, this isn't my keyboard.
And in the following paragraph, removing the S from districts. Our Vice President Sinowski.
To clarify, is it corresponding rights of parents or parents' rights?
I think it should track the state statute.
Me too.
Titled Rights of Parents, so corresponding rights of parents.
Okay.
Sex
Thank you for that,
education
Kath.
and corresponding rights of, I would just want to make sure I get it right when I
Yes.
go to revise.
Sex education.
And corresponding rights of parents.
Of parents.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments on the policy as amended? We do have a motion on the floor. All those in favor of approving action item 4D, approval revisions to policy IHAMB, family life education as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to action item 4E, approval revisions to policy JFB, open enrollment. Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments? Are there any board member questions or comments? Hearing none, the chair moves to approve action item 4E, approval revisions to policy JFB, open enrollment. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sinowski seconds. It is moved and seconded to approve action item 4E, approval revisions to policy JFB, open enrollment as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to action item 4F, approval of Sixth Amendment to Easement Agreement with American Towers LLC, AT, at Yavapai Elementary School. Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments? Are there any questions or comments? Board Member Beckman.
Ms. Bird, can you just tell the board what you told me as far as when I emailed you, why there was a fee reduction and what the amount was before?
So the fee reduction was brought about at a request of the American Tower LLC. The easement fee that American Tower was paying was approximately $5,000 to $6,000 more than the easement fee that other tower operators were paying us, and thus our CFO felt that in order to keep the cell tower, because these cell towers do provide a stream of revenue for the district, that fee reduction was fair. In addition to the fee reduction, however, there is a 3% annual escalation. If my recollection serves me, and I actually don't have my email in front of me, Shannon may be able to speak to it, but I believe the total loss in revenue to the district in the first year is approximately $522 and something cents, which amounts to $42 and something per month. And so it made sense, in order to keep the cell tower, to generate the revenue that we are getting from it, to reduce that fee. We should recoup our money fairly quickly due to the 3% escalation that is built into that amendment.
Board Member Hart-Wells.
So each board member is being asked to sign an affidavit
Yes, ma'am.
under this contract. Was that the case in amendments, the original contract through the Fifth Amendment?
Okay, so the original contract, and let me remind you that the
I know
original
it's old.
contract was signed in 1990 and included a lump sum payment and some TVs. So
Right there, yeah.
you ask for history, Board
I
Member
know, I
Hart-Wells,
like
I
it.
give you history. I do not know whether or not in the prior amendments the affidavit was required. What I can tell you, in consulting with outside counsel, that it is a common industry practice, it is the corporate practice of American Towers and its subsidiary, American Tower LLC, and that there is nothing unusual about it. We, as a district, don't require our signatories on the other side to notarize or sign by affidavit. However, a representative of American Tower LLC will in fact be signing the contract. Outside counsel did not feel like that there was anything odd or strange about the request.
So they will be signing, they will be
They will,
counter-signing?
yes. There is a signature page, and it's, as the grantee, they will in fact be signing the amendment.
Just curious, I understand. Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you done with your
I'm finished,
question?
yes, thank you, Ms. Bird.
Board Member Beckman.
I apologize. Why is it necessary then? Maybe it's usual and customary, but do we know why it's necessary?
I think they just want an assurance that that you are affirming that you understand what is in the contract. That's why you would do that you've been explained, that it's a fail-safe for them, to protect them from somebody going back and saying, I didn't know what was in this contract. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. I didn't know what my superintendent was agreeing to when I voted for. Again, it's not an uncommon business practice. There's really nothing nefarious going on here. Is it a legal requirement for contracts of this type in Arizona? No. But it is what the company is requiring. And again, I spoke at length with outside counsel earlier today, and they did not have, their feeling was that, an advisement was that there was no reason not to proceed if that is the corporate practice of this particular cell tower land trust company.
So,
Board Member Hart-Wells.
sorry, I'm going to get acknowledged there. So just to clarify, then, we don't know if the previous boards have signed affidavits, each individual has signed an affidavit under, say, the Fifth Amendment? Does outside counsel know that? Do they have that institutional knowledge?
Well, again,
I realize that.
not off the top, no, she did not have that institutional knowledge off the top of her head.
Okay.
Shannon, do you have copies of those contracts? I do not. Let me see if I can. She did give me the dates. There have been, as you know, because this is the Sixth Amendment, several revisions to that contract, some dating back. Looks like I don't have the date on the 5th. I can tell you that the 2nd, which is the actual bulk of the contract language, goes back well into the 90s. So I really can't answer your question as to was it done in the past. It's what they're asking us to do in order to move forward with the amendment today.
Okay, so my last question then, would you sign an affidavit for this contract?
That's
Knowing
all-
what you know about the diligence on the company?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you.
Board Member Beckman?
What is this contract needed by?
What is this?
What is it needed by? Like, I mean, is there a date that we have to renew by, or, I mean, is it necessary to have it voted on specifically tonight? Because my follow-up question would be, have you discussed it with American Tower that we don't sign it as a board, that we have our CFO or someone else sign it as customary practice of this board? I don't know, I don't think I've signed many things with regard to something similar in the years that I've been on this board. So I almost would ask that we table it and go back to American Tower. Unless it's necessary, then the rest of us can vote to find out if it's possible to have a representative in our district, as we typically do with other contracts, sign for us.
Well, there is a representative of the district that's also going to sign.
Right, but I mean,
I can tell you that, is there a drop dead date by which something expires? No, it is. No, there is not. This is an amendment. So the contract will continue. I will tell you that historically, and it is not the fault of the district or outside counsel, this has been in the works for at least 3 or 4 months now, because there appeared to be a somewhat young and inexperienced attorney on the other side. And so the working out of the actual amendment language took a little bit longer than usual. I would like, before I went back, or before I had outside counsel go back and reopen somewhat the negotiations on this contract, to understand a little bit more about your hesitation, so that I could present that accurately as a concern.
it's not that I'm questioning whether the contract itself has, as you put it, some nefarious intent or terms, et cetera. I just don't know from a personal perspective, I want to get into the practice of signing, even co-signing contracts like this when we haven't been doing that in the past, and it's not something that's usual and customary to do. For us in a contract capacity, not necessarily with this particular company. So if you came to me and said, we have to move forward, this is usual, and here's the reasons why, it may be a consideration, but I would like to know if it was even brought up and why they felt it was necessary to be able to move forward, other than they want to understand that you understand the contract. I mean, we bring before us huge contracts to rebuild schools, et cetera, and no one says, we want to make sure the board understands the contract in a big, so hopefully I'm being clear.
No, you are being clear. What I can tell you is, to be quite honest, I do not believe that it came up in negotiations. It wouldn't necessarily be a term in the contract that would be negotiated. It's simply the business practice of this particular entity. The parent company of this particular entity is very large. They own something like 173,000 easements and cell tower equipment worldwide. And it just happens to be the business practice, which didn't raise an eyebrow when the actual content was being discussed. And so I cannot stand here and tell you that it was something that was asked. Certainly we can go back to them and do that. There's nothing that says that we cannot. I would say that you would have to either table this particular item, or you would have to vote not to approve. As far as I know, I'm going to double check, Shannon, there is no drop dead date in terms of us losing revenue.
I'm going to leave this open for the rest of the board members to discuss. I think that kind of brought up my concern.
Board Member Hartwells?
Well, it is an option to table it until the next board meeting, is it not?
Yeah, it's an option.
Board Member Beckman?
Can I make a motion, or would
You
you
may.
like to make a motion?
No,
Then
you
I
may.
move that we table action item 4G, approval of the award of request for proposal number 22-33-26.
No. 4F.
Oh, wrong one, sorry, the one above that, we don't want to be doing that. 4F, and I won't necessarily read, the Sixth Amendment to the Easement Agreement with American Towers LLC at Yavapai Elementary School, pending further questioning by the council.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded to table action item 4F, approval of Sixth Amendment to Easement Agreement with American Towers LLC, AT at Yavapai Elementary School. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of tabling action item 4F, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0.
President Greenberg, just so that I'm clear on the direction that the board would like me to take, you would like to go back to the cell tower company and ask that they remove the provision that any of the board members sign or provide an affidavit, and that the contract is simply signed by a representative of the district. Is that your request?
Board Member Beckman?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
The board will now move to action item 4G, approval of award of request for proposal number 223326, district-wide data gathering and analysis. Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments?
30 seconds, just as a quick reminder that in the past, the district had contracted with Hanover Research. During the course of my time here, we ended up ending that contract, working with EAB. They both provide similar services, and at the time, we had indicated we would put out an RFP to determine which organization or any others that might provide a similar service would best meet the needs of the district. So that's what this RFP is about.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments about action item 4G? Hearing none, the chair moves to approve action item 4G, approval of award of request for proposal number 223326, district-wide data gathering and analysis. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sinowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 4G, approval of award of request for proposal number 223326, district-wide data gathering and analysis as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to action item 4H, approval of the revised fiscal year 2020-2021 annual financial report, AFR. Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments?
Best to let Shannon provide the information on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board President Greenberg, members of the board, we had a statutory requirement to submit the AFR by October 16th, which we did. However, the AG's office puts together the forms. There are a considerable amount of formulas that are within those AFR forms. And so as we submitted that, and as time went by, the AG realized that there were issues with formulas in there and made those corrections. Those were not things that we could, those forms are locked. The AG has to tell you what formula to actually go in and change and exactly how to change that formula for you to do that, or you have to download the forms again and redo everything again. So it wasn't something that we could necessarily change on our own or necessarily always recognize. Some of the formulas you look at and don't, because it's pulling from multiple areas within the AFR, we may not have even realized that something was off with it. In doing the AFR, just to kind of explain part of it, you take your general ledger and you dump it into a separate file within that Excel workbook. And then there are formulas in there that take the data that you dumped in and recalculate all the kinds. And so they put some of the cells are filled in with what you've dumped in from your GL. Some of them we have to go in and calculate and put in numbers and verify. So the things that had errors in them that were pointed out by the AG's office really had to do with some of the formulas, the things that they pull out specifically to call out specific data points for them. So we did point those out on there. I can go through them if you want. Essentially, it was some COVID relief expenditures The revenue and expenditures didn't pull in from the formula for that. We had a formula adjustment where it was taking multiple funds and dividing out how much by function and supply category, what those totals were, so it changed some of those numbers when the correction came through. And then on the summary page, the summary page is completely locked. And one of the first things that you're told when you do AFR budget is don't unlock the sheets, because if you change one thing, it can trickle through and affect your entire thing. So we kind of recognize a couple things looked a little strange to us, but again, we don't change those pages. Really, it had to do with, the changes had to do with some revenues and budgeted expenditures, which we don't catch when we're looking at a summary. The ending fund balance looks correct. So some of those we went, oh, didn't even realize within the budget, because it's based off of cash, that the budget put in there was wrong. So there's just a handful of things that really affected our AFR. Fortunately, there was a good list of probably 20 plus changes that not all of them affected ours, but some of them did. And so therefore, we're bringing it back with the corrections so that what we have submitted to the state and what we have posted on our website is the accurate, updated, correct formulas AFR.
Board Member Beckman and then Board Member Hartwells.
We're on deck tonight, I guess. Shannon, give me a summary as it relates to material dollar amounts and changes that you're saying maybe took place. Because when we read this, or the public reads this, you went through and you said there's formula errors, but we're really not talking about what the governing board approved, and is there material changes to dollar amounts because of those formula errors?
Well, to give you an example, one of them that was changed is on page 5. It had to do with federal and state projects. There was a formula. So within the revenues and within the expenditures, there were lumped totals, but there's a line that called out specifically COVID-19 federal funds. So where is that $11.4 million was up in the revenues and in the expenditures? On the original one, it was 0 on that. It was like line 19. It was 0 on that line. So even though it was up in the grand totals, there's a line that says, well, we want to pull out exactly what was just for COVID-19. We had 0 because the formula wasn't working. When they correct the formula, it puts in an amount of 11.4. Doesn't change how much revenue we got, doesn't change the expenditures we received. It just changes the call out for how much was COVID-19 in those federal projects.
So as it relates to all of these changes, are you saying that the total dollar amounts did not change, just your line item kind of breakout was off?
Yes.
Because you had the formula in a different cell or something like that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is corrected and transparent then and on the website, and what you are submitting will match that perfectly?
It's not on what we have on our website now, and what's submitted is the old one. If once approved tonight, this will be re-uploaded to the state, and the new corrected version will be on our website.
Okay. So, and then the last question, because this is, this is pretty important.
Yes.
Has this happened before? Do we know what went wrong? I know you were under the gun with this, and you guys had some kind of figuring out to do at the last minute here. But I guess as a board member, I need to make sure that this isn't something when we go the next go around that I'm going to have to question because whether we have fixed this.
So when we take this to the board, part of it depends on when it goes. So there are changes that happen every year when they send out the AFR. My expectation for this year was that there was really no change. Last year we had a big change to the AFR. They added the school by school. That I can see where things could get complicated when you're adding new things. You're making a dramatic change to the forms. There really wasn't a dramatic change to the forms this year, so I'm not quite sure why there were so many. I get the one on page 5, COVID-19 expenses. That's new. COVID-19, that's new. There's dates that change. So when you're pulling files from other Excel worksheets, there's date changes that have to happen. That was one of the issues. There's always corrections that we end up seeing. Generally, they happen before we take it to the board. I think last year we took the AFR to the board. It was like the 15th of October. So by then, you generally don't have it. So yes, there are corrections that do come out. We try to make we make those corrections that we can up until it has to go to the board. If a correction happens after it goes to the board, that's out of my control. We do try to catch those things, but if the AG comes back and says, here's formula changes we made and we've already submitted, that I don't have that in my control. I would hope that moving forward, this would not happen again. But I can't stand here and say 100% this could never happen.
And I appreciate that things do happen, I get that. I'm just saying where we could have figured out what we fix and not have come back up again. Because some of the stuff, obviously, it's all very, very important. And when you're looking at those expenditures as it relates to classroom dollars, et cetera, people really look closely at all that stuff, so.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sorry, Superintendent Menzel, would you like to make a comment?
I just want to reiterate that what I understand is the case. We don't set that formula.
Right.
That's a formula that's given to us by the state. So it was not an error on the part of our CFO or her team. This is the state didn't have the formula pulling correctly. And so after we approved it, they modified the formulas, and so then we have to resubmit.
That is correct. And the one thing that I saw this year that I have never seen in the past is we actually got an email that went out to districts that said, we've made these corrections. If you've uploaded your AFR, please note that you need to go back and take it to your board and recorrect. I have never seen that email
I
come
appreciate
through.
that clarity because it wasn't received completely that way, so I do appreciate that clarity. Thank you.
Board Member Hartwells?
Both of my questions have been asked. Thank you. Shannon, you and your team, thank you for all the hard work you did on this. I know it wasn't ideal.
Well, and I really don't like coming back to say, we have to make changes on here, and can you please reapprove it? But it's really one of those things that happened. Like, we submitted there was, I don't know how many changes that happened after the date of when we had this done. So that was a little out of our control.
Are there any further questions or comments? Shannon, just for clarity on the record, did this negatively affect our prior year or this current year budgeting in terms of carry forward?
No.
Thank you. The chair moves to approve action item 4H, approval of the revised fiscal year 2020-2021 annual financial report, AFR. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sinowski seconds. It is moved and seconded to approve action item 4H, approval of the revised fiscal year 2020-2021 annual financial report, AFR. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to agenda item 5, executive session. 5A, the governing board will convene an executive session to review with the superintendent his quarterly performance and to discuss the working relationship between the superintendent and the board. The chair moves to move into executive session in accordance with agenda item 5A as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sinowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board convene an executive session pursuant to agenda item 5A as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0, and the board will now convene an executive session. The board is reconvening this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board on November 9th, 2021. The time is 10:16 p.m. The board will now move to agenda item 7A, adjournment. The chair moves to adjourn this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board on November 9th, 2021 at 10:16 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sanowski seconds. Is moved and seconded to adjourn this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0, and the meeting is adjourned.